What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, I'm going to be giving you my first impressions of the Motorola Moto G Play 2023. Now, to be perfectly honest, compared to last year at least, I don't really know what this phone is supposed to be a successor to. There hasn't actually been a Moto G Play for a little while now, and on one hand, I guess this phone could technically be a successor to the Moto G Power, but at the same time, it looks a lot more like the Moto G Pure, so we'll see. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description. Although this is, of course, my first video about this phone, I will be making plenty of others in the future, so as they come out, I will be linking to them there, along with information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Now, as always, before we actually take a look at the phone itself, let's see what comes in the box. So definitely a nice box, a little different from what we typically see with Motorola phones, eco-friendly packaging. It's like if Whole Foods sold smartphones. Inside here, we got a SIM card removal tool, quick start guide, wall adapter, and a USB-C cable. So in general, of course, pretty typical stuff, but I will say I am glad we do get a wall adapter here because nowadays, lots of manufacturers don't include them anymore. And although I feel like most people probably at least have one or two already, getting a wall adapter when you get a new phone is always nice. So onto the phone itself. With the Moto G Play 2023, we're getting a 6.5-inch 90Hz IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So I was making this point earlier in another video. Pretty much every phone nowadays has a 90Hz refresh rate, which I'm definitely not complaining about. It does make the movement on the screen a bit faster and smoother, so the phone is going to feel a bit more premium to use. So it is a nice thing, but it was interesting seeing a couple years ago. It was more of a unique, kind of premium feeling feature, but at this point nowadays, it's more or less a standard. Aside from that, despite having more of a basic entry-level kind of display, I do think for what it is, it does look pretty good. Despite only having a 720p resolution, I did notice the image is decently sharp. I guess if you look really closely, you can see some pixels, but that is to be expected. And I mean, if you're watching the occasional video every now and then, playing basic mobile games and stuff like that, I don't think it's really going to be a problem. And again, in general, things do look pretty good. The colors and brightness definitely look good, especially considering, again, this is really more of an entry-level phone. A lot of phones in this price range have really dim displays, and although I seriously doubt this phone is going to be easy to see if you're like outside in super bright sunlight or something like that in most normal settings, I do think it is going to be perfectly fine. As far as the size and dimensions go, it's pretty much the industry standard at 6.5 inches. While being nothing out of the ordinary, it is decently large. So if you're going to be on your phone a decent amount doing stuff like web browsing, reading, social media, you are going to get a pretty good experience here. And with the 20:9 aspect ratio, we are getting a decently tall and narrow form factor. So in landscape mode, when you're doing stuff like looking at photos, watching videos, things like that, you're going to get a nice immersive cinematic experience. Things are going to look pretty good overall. And then of course, if you're doing something vertical like reading, scrolling through a feed, things like that, with a tall and narrow form factor like this, you can fit a decent amount of content on the screen without having to scroll too much. So in general, is it a super nice, fancy display that's going to be the best choice for consuming all kinds of content all day, stuff like that? No, it's definitely not, but for an entry-level phone, if you are going to be consuming a decent amount of content, watching videos, using social media, maybe playing a game or two, stuff like that, I do think considering what it is, the display on this phone is really good, and I honestly have no complaints. That being said though, when it comes to storage, it's kind of a different story. With the Moto G Play 2023, we're only getting 32GB of internal storage, and while it does have microSD card expansion, like pretty much every non-flagship Android phone does, at this point in 2023, 32GB just really isn't enough. Sure, if you're barely doing anything on your phone, if you have like 3 apps, and you're really more of a light occasional user, then you will at least get by. But honestly, for the average user, even if you're not doing a ton on your phone, just keep in mind, 32GB is gonna fill up pretty quickly. I mean, even for what I have on this phone currently, it's really not a lot of stuff. I mean, a few social media apps, search engines, utility stuff, not really a whole lot, maybe a couple games here and there. And as you can see, all this stuff, which again is really not a lot, is taking up 80% of the total storage. So if you are someone who's constantly downloading apps, games, stuff like that, that tends to take up a bit more space, you are definitely going to want to go for something that has quite a bit more storage than this, because at this point I feel like 64GB even then is really a bare minimum, and if you're more of a power user, even that's probably not going to be enough for you. And to make things even worse for this phone, at this point in 2023, even in this $169 price range, finding a phone that has 64GB of storage really isn't that hard. I mean, there are still unfortunately plenty of entry-level phones like this that don't have a ton of storage, but again, in general, if you really want more storage, then even in this price range you will have some options. Now for security features, this phone does not have face unlock, but it does have a fingerprint scanner right here in the back. Now I'm personally not really too sad about this because I never use face unlock anyway, unless of course it's something like my iPhone 13 where I'm forced to. But in general for me, when a phone has a fingerprint scanner, I feel like face unlock isn't really that necessary. But that being said, if you prefer face unlock to a fingerprint scanner, then again, just keep in mind, this phone unfortunately does not have it. But let's give the fingerprint scanner a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. For the camera setup here, we got a real nice looking hole punch design for the front facing camera. In this price range, definitely not something you see every day. Most of the lower end phones like this have the same generic water drop notch design, so I am glad to see something a bit more unique here. Now this camera is 5 megapixels, then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 16 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So in general here, we have a decent amount of features. Unfortunately, there's no ultra wide camera, but now that I think of it, most entry level phones don't have one anyway, so it's not really that big a deal. But just keep in mind, if you do want to get those wider angle photos, then this is probably not going to be the phone for you. But aside from this, at least we do get a macro camera, and of course a depth sensing camera for portrait mode. So it's not like the camera setup is completely featureless. For the photo quality, although this is my first impressions video, so I haven't actually used the camera yet, but I'm not really expecting a whole lot. I mean, this is a pretty low end device, and usually phones in this price range don't have particularly impressive cameras. Now, if you're just taking a couple photos here and there for something like social media, maybe an Instagram story for example, for that kind of thing it will at least get the job done. But if you're taking a lot of pictures, then definitely don't expect studio level photo quality from this phone. When it comes to RAM and processor, with the Moto G Play 2023, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G37 processor. Interesting name. The last G37 I saw was made by Infinity, but performance-wise, essentially this processor is honestly more or less the same as the MediaTek Helio G25, which we found in the Moto G Pure. For what it is, being more of an entry-level phone, it is decent. I mean, for more basic daily activities like web browsing, social media, watching the occasional video every now and then, and stuff like that, it will get the job done, but keep in mind, this is really not a very fast phone. So if you're going to be on your device a lot, especially doing more demanding activities, in that case, the performance is probably going to be a bit disappointing, because in general, despite not being terrible, this phone is definitely on the slower side. Now, I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 5, and here are the results I got. So yeah, again, definitely not the fastest phone out there. So if you are looking for more of an entry-level device that still has good performance, then honestly, you can definitely do better. But if you are more of a light, occasional user, and you don't really need anything that fast, then keep in mind again, for more basic activities, this phone will at least get the job done. Now with this phone, we are getting a really large 5000 mAh battery that supports 10-watt fast charging, which is that even fast charging? In my experience, the charging speed is at least decent, but take this with a grain of salt because I don't really pay that much attention to charging speed anyway. But if you are in a situation where you really need to charge your phone fast, then keep in mind the charging speed with this phone is really not the best. But that being said, when it comes to the actual battery itself, with a 5000 mAh battery, you can expect to get really good battery life here. So if you are in a situation where you're really not around a charger a lot anyway, but you still need to use your phone all day, then a phone like this that has a really large battery is definitely going to be a good choice. In addition to this, down the road, as the battery degrades, which all batteries do, with the 5000 mAh battery compared to something like a 3000 mAh battery, it's definitely still going to last quite a bit longer. So if you like to get one phone and keep it for a longer time, then again, a phone like this with a large battery is definitely going to be a great choice. When it comes to software, this phone does currently have Android 12. Now, I imagine it will eventually get an update to Android 13 just because the Moto G Pure, I think, started out with Android 11. And it did, or at least some of them did, actually end up getting the update to Android 12. So with the Moto G Play, this phone is in pretty much the same tier, so I think it should at least get one update. But just keep in mind, as of the recording of this video, this phone does not have Android 13. It does only come with Android 12. So in general, if you do want the latest version of Android right now, then at least as of right this second, a Samsung Galaxy A series is pretty much going to be your only option. But in general, I mean, at this point, most entry-level phones still do have Android 12, so it's not really that big a deal. So if you're not too concerned about the software, then most likely this is really not going to matter too much. Another thing I do want to point out here is that unfortunately, the Moto G Play 2023 does not have NFC. To be perfectly honest, since this is Motorola, I'm not really that surprised, but at this point in 2023, I feel like every phone should have it, because at this point, contactless mobile payment services, tap and pay, stuff like that, is all getting more and more popular and widely used. So especially if having the latest features is important to you, this is probably going to be disappointing. But of course, if you don't really use tap and pay, then this most likely is not going to matter at all. Now, taking a look at the actual design here, again, I am really glad this phone has a hole punch design instead of a water drop notch for the front facing camera. It gives it a nicer, more modern look. And in general, compared to most phones in this price range, I do think it looks really nice. The materials also feel pretty decent. The back has a nice matte material. Fingerprints don't really show up too badly. And despite being made pretty much entirely of plastic, like basically every phone in this price range, the plastic does feel decent quality. The build quality is also pretty good. And the phone does have a decent amount of weight to it. So in general, despite not having the most exciting design, I feel like pretty much no phone does anyway. So for what it is, I do think the materials and look of this phone are pretty good. But in conclusion, my overall first impressions of the Motorola Moto G Play 2023. In general, I feel like this phone is pretty much a newer, more updated version of the Moto G Pure. In fact, in almost every way, it's basically the same thing. The performance is pretty much the same. I do think the camera is a bit better, and the display is a little nicer too, especially with the 90Hz refresh rate, which again, pretty much every phone has. But overall, if you are looking for a really affordable entry-level phone for more light use and basic activities, and you want a decently nice display, a large battery, a nice looking design, and a pretty okay camera, then in that case, I do think the Moto G Play 2023 is worth considering. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalibas Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.